Have you ever felt like the more you try to learn English, the more it hurts? As if every time you open your mouth, something inside you sinks because you can't catch the words, can't express what you feel, and no one truly understands you. This video is the story I lived in Denmark, getting lost, breaking down, feeling voiceless, until I discovered the strange beauty hidden inside my own pain, and turned it into the key to training my English listening, reading, and speaking with clarity. Lost in Copenhagen. Imagine landing in a new country and realizing your confidence didn't travel with you. That was me on my first week in Copenhagen, wandering through the clean, icy streets while my brain behaved like a Wi-Fi signal with only one bar. You know that awkward moment when someone speaks English to you, and your ears nod yes but your soul whispers no? That became my daily routine. I kept hearing people talk, but it felt like their words were riding bicycles. Fast, smooth, and absolutely impossible to catch. It's funny how your brain reacts when it feels threatened. According to cognitive science, when you're stressed, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for language, basically files a complaint and goes on strike. And that's exactly what mine did. Every time someone asked me a simple question like, "Do you need a bag?" my mind spun into existential chaos. Do I? Do I exist? Why am I alive? Meanwhile, the cashier stared, waiting for me to respond with something more useful than blinking. One night, I was walking along Nyhavn, watching the colorful houses reflect on the water, and I felt something strange. Loneliness wrapped in beauty. Denmark looked like a postcard, but I felt like a typo. You might know that feeling, the one where everyone else seems fluent in life while you're stuck buffering. My English wasn't bad, but listening to real people in real situations felt like trying to catch butterflies with chopsticks. Pretty but impossible. So there I was, a grown adult, afraid of ordering a hot dog. My stomach said yes, but my anxiety said the Danish vendor would judge my grammar, my accent, and probably my entire ancestry. That's what happens when you lose confidence. Your brain becomes a dramatic screenwriter, creating tragedies no one asked for. But something shifted that night. I realized the real problem wasn't my English. It was the story I kept telling myself, that everyone else was perfect and I was the only one struggling. In reality, the human brain loves patterns, and when it hears unfamiliar sounds, it panics. Not because you're stupid, not because you're slow, simply because your neural pathways haven't built a solid bridge yet. And yes, it's annoying, but also fixable. As I stood there under the yellow streetlights, I made a quiet decision. If I was going to survive in this country, I had to stop hiding inside my fear. My ears needed messy practice. My voice needed embarrassing moments. My confidence needed to be rebuilt brick by tiny brick. That I didn't know it then, but that night in Copenhagen would become the first photograph in a long internal album. A collection of imperfect, beautiful memories that would eventually teach me how to see the beauty inside my own pain. Because honestly, your brain isn't sabotaging you. It's just dramatically overprotective. The Café Breakdown. There's a strange kind of humiliation that hits you when you're sitting in a warm cafe, surrounded by the smell of fresh pastries, and suddenly your entire ability to speak English collapses like a badly built IKEA shelf. That happened to me in a small cafe near Nørreport. You'd think a cozy place with candles, soft music, and cinnamon buns would calm the nervous system. But no, my brain chose that exact setting to stage a full linguistic meltdown. I had rehearsed my order in my head at least 7 times. You know how it goes. 1 cappuccino, 1 cappuccino, 1 cappuccino, please. Simple, elegant, foolproof. Except when the barista smiled at me and said something that, swear to God, sounded like a blur of vowels doing gymnastics. My mind froze. Not politely. More like Windows XP crashing with a blue screen. And the worst part, I wasn't stressed about getting the coffee. I was stressed about sounding stupid. If you've ever tried to speak English while your anxiety is dancing disco in your chest, you know exactly what I mean. Your tongue gets heavier. Your sentences fall apart. Your brain becomes a confused tourist without a map. Psychologists actually have a name for this: linguistic self-consciousness overload. It happens when your fear of being judged hijacks your working memory. Basically, your brain tries to run English while also running the app called, "What if they think I'm dumb?" And guess which app crashes first? Yeah, English. So I stood there, holding up the entire line, looking like a frightened potato. The barista tried again, slower this time, and I still didn't understand. My cheeks burned. My stomach dropped. And right there, in the safest place imaginable, I felt something inside me quietly break. That's when he appeared. Not an angel, just a Danish photographer with wild hair, a vintage camera, and the gentle chaos of someone who sees too much. He was sitting at the table next to me and must have noticed my inner collapse because he simply said, "Take your time. We've all been there." It was such a normal sentence, but it hit me like a defibrillator. Someone understood. Someone didn't laugh. Someone didn't judge. Just like that, the tension cracked. I exhaled. I ordered. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Later, when I sat down with my shaky cappuccino, the photographer leaned over and said, "The way you look just now, that's what I photograph. People when their hearts break a little." I didn't know it yet, but that simple encounter would set off a chain of moments that changed the way I listened, spoke, and even felt my own emotions. Sometimes your breakdown isn't a failure. It's the universe tapping your shoulder saying, "Pay attention. Something important is starting." And honestly, maybe your English isn't broken. Maybe it's just learning how to breathe again. The photographer stranger. Some people enter your life quietly like a soft click of a camera shutter, and somehow change the entire picture. That Danish photographer, yes, the one who witnessed my emotional self-destruction over a cappuccino, turned out to be one of those people. At first, he seemed like every stereotype you've ever heard about artists in Scandinavia. Calm, vaguely mysterious, wrapped in layers of wool, and carrying the aura of someone who has deep thoughts about snowflakes. But there was something else about him. A softness, a way of observing the world that made you feel both exposed and understood. He introduced himself as Emil, a photographer who specialized in what he called broken heart portraits. I thought he was joking. Who takes photos of heartbreak? Instagram influencers? Poets in crisis? But he said it with the seriousness of a man discussing national security. According to him, people reveal the most honest version of themselves not when they're confident but when they're cracked open. Pain distorts the mask, he told me. And that's when I take the shot. Oddly enough, I didn't run away. Maybe because when someone sees your embarrassment and doesn't flinch, you instinctively trust them. Or maybe because I was tired of pretending I was fine. Either way, we ended up talking or trying to talk. I stumbled over my English. Words came out wobbly, like newborn deer learning to stand. But instead of rushing me or politely nodding through confusion, Emil actually listened. Really listened. With full attention, without impatience, without that Your trying face people sometimes give language learners. There's a psychological effect known as attentive regulation. When someone listens to you with deep presence, your nervous system calms down, your speech becomes smoother, and your brain stops panicking about grammar. That's what happened with Emil. His silence wasn't awkward. It was permission that he asked me about Denmark, about why I came here, about why I looked like my soul had slipped on a wet floor that morning. I laughed because honestly, why not? Vulnerability had already knocked on the door. Might as well let it inside. As we talked, he told me about his photography project. Capturing the invisible beauty inside people's emotional bruises. We try so hard to hide our pain, he said. But pain has texture. Pain has light. Pain tells the truth. Something shifted in me. I had spent weeks feeling stupid, small, broken by the simplest conversations. But for the first time, someone suggested that maybe the cracks weren't failures, they were evidence. Evidence that I was trying, changing, stretching, becoming someone new. Before he left the cafe, he looked at me with a half smile and said, "If you ever want to see your courage, not your mistakes, let me take your picture." And for a moment I wondered, what if the parts of me I was ashamed of were actually beautiful? Because sometimes the stranger who sees you at your lowest isn't there to judge you, he's there to hand you a mirror you never knew you needed. Speaking through silence. There's a specific kind of silence in Denmark that feels almost supernatural. It's not empty. More like a soft blanket the whole country agreed to wrap themselves in. And somehow that silence became the strangest teacher of English I ever had. One afternoon, Emil invited me to walk through a snowy park near Osterbro. He said he wanted to show me something, which, coming from a photographer, could mean anything from a beautiful landscape to a philosophical lecture about tree branches. As we walked, the snow fell in slow motion, like the universe was trying to speak but didn't want to interrupt us. And that's when I realized something bizarre. I was terrified of the silence between conversations. Not the words. Not the grammar. The silence. When you're learning a language, silence feels like failure. Like you're supposed to fill it. Prove something. Perform something. But Emil didn't rush. He didn't rescue me from awkwardness. He didn't jump in when my English stumbled. He just let the silence sit there. Calm, patient, unbothered by my anxiety. And in that stillness, something unusual happened. My brain finally stopped screaming. Neuroscientists call this the reset effect. When the nervous system enters a calm state, the auditory cortex becomes more receptive. Your listening becomes sharper, your speaking smoother, and your words, those stubborn little creatures, stop hiding behind fear. In a strange way, the silence was teaching me how to listen again. Not with panic, not with pressure, but with presence. At one point, Emil stopped walking and looked at a frozen pond. "You hear that?" he asked. I listened. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." "Exactly," he smiled. "That's the sound of your thoughts slowing down." I wanted to argue because who says things like that except people who own expensive notebooks and drink herbal tea? But he wasn't wrong. When the world got quiet, I finally started noticing details. The crunch of snow, the soft hum of the wind, the faint laughter of kids far away. My brain for once wasn't busy judging my English. It was simply absorbing the world. Then he said something I never expected. "Maybe you don't need to speak perfectly to be understood. Maybe your silence is saying more than your words." It hit me harder than any grammar lesson ever had. I had been fighting so desperately to speak that I forgot listening is half of communication. And listening is not just about catching every word. It's about catching the feeling underneath them. When I let the silence breathe, the meaning became clearer. His English felt slower. My English felt steadier. Our conversation felt real. And that afternoon, in the middle of a snowy Danish park, I realized something beautifully inconvenient. Sometimes the best way to train your English is to stop talking long enough to hear what your heart is trying to say. Because honestly, your voice isn't weak, that it's just waiting for the noise to quiet down so it can come out. When English feels too heavy, there are days when English doesn't feel like a language at all. It feels like lifting a refrigerator with your bare hands. Heavy, awkward, and guaranteed to crush your toes if you're not careful. That heaviness hit me hardest about a month into living in Denmark. I remember waking up one morning, hearing my neighbor greet me with a cheerful good morning. And my brain reacted like he had just recited Shakespeare upside down. Nothing made sense. Every sound felt exaggerated. Every sentence felt like an exam. My thoughts moved slower than Danish winter sunlight. Here's the part no one tells you. When you're emotionally overwhelmed, lonely, homesick, stressed, the brain treats foreign languages like unnecessary furniture. Just puts them in the basement. Neuroscience calls this the cognitive load overflow, which basically means your brain is too busy managing your emotions to care about verb tenses. And honestly, who can blame it? If your heart is busy trying not to fall apart, your mouth is not going to prioritize perfect pronunciation. One evening, after a long day of misunderstandings, I met Emil again by the lakes in Copenhagen. I told him half-jokingly that English felt too heavy to carry. He nodded in that quiet, annoyingly wise photographer way and said, "Maybe you're trying to lift the whole language at once." I rolled my eyes because who says things like that? But he continued, "Try lifting something smaller. Something tiny. A sentence. A whisper. A thought." That's when he introduced me to what later became my lifeline, the micro-speaking principle. Instead of trying to speak in full, perfect sentences, the kind that make you sweat and doubt your existence, you practice with tiny, breathable pieces of language. 5-second sentences. Mini thoughts. Simple emotions. Things your brain can carry even when your heart feels heavy. For example, instead of forcing yourself to say, "I'm struggling to adapt to this new environment and sometimes I feel overwhelmed by the language barrier," you simply say, "I feel tired today." Or, "This is difficult." Or, "I'm trying." These micro-sentences do two magical things. First, they reduce your cognitive load, meaning your brain stops acting like an overworked office employee and starts cooperating again. Second, they rebuild your confidence molecule by molecule. Every tiny sentence is a brick. And brick by brick, the heaviness starts to lighten. We practiced as we walked along the path by the water. I said small things out loud. "It's cold. I like this view. I'm nervous." It felt childish at first, like learning how to talk all over again. But soon something shifted. The words flowed easier. My voice felt steadier. My mind didn't panic as much. It was as if English was no longer a refrigerator. I had turned it into something I could hold in one hand. Emil watched me quietly and said, "See? Your English isn't heavy. Your fear is." And honestly, he was right. Because sometimes the real weight you're carrying isn't the language, It's the story you tell yourself about failing at it. The bridge lesson. There's a bridge in Aarhus that doesn't look special at first glance. Just a simple wooden walkway stretching over quiet water. But for me, that bridge became the place where something inside finally shifted. Emil had invited me on a small day trip, claiming he wanted to test a theory. Whenever someone says that, you know you're either about to learn something profound or get emotionally roasted. With Emil, it was usually both. As we walked across the bridge, the wind whipped through our scarves like it was trying to remind us winter wasn't finished yet. I remember feeling unusually exposed, like every insecurity I carried, every mispronunciation, every moment I froze in conversation, every fear of being misunderstood, was suddenly louder than the wind itself. It's funny. Your brain can ignore pain for weeks, but the moment you stand somewhere peaceful, it decides to unpack every emotional suitcase you never asked for. Emil leaned on the railing and said, "You know why people struggle to speak a foreign language?" I sighed, prepared for a lecture. But he continued in that soft, frustratingly calm voice. Because they think they need to sound strong, even when they feel broken. I didn't respond. Maybe because I didn't know how. Maybe because the truth hit too hard. When you learn English or any language, you don't just fight grammar. You fight the fear of being seen as incomplete. And nothing pokes that fear harder than speaking out loud. Emil took out his camera but didn't lift it. "Pain," he said, "is like the light on this bridge. You only notice its beauty when you stop running from it." Then he asked me to do something ridiculous. Tell the story of my struggle with English out loud, while standing there in the cold. My mind panicked. Storytelling? In English? While emotionally fragile? Absolutely not. But science has this funny way of backing up things we hate. Studies show that narrative retelling reduces emotional intensity by up to 40%. When you articulate a painful experience, you create distance, you stop drowning in it and start observing it. So I began speaking. Slowly. Shakily. Brokenly. I talked about the nights I couldn't understand simple conversations. The mornings I avoided small talk. The shame of repeating sorry 3 times. The sting of feeling stupid. Words came out uneven, but they came. And with every sentence, the tension loosened. It was like the bridge was carrying the weight for me. When I finished, Emil finally raised his camera and clicked once. Just one shot. "Not of your pain," he said. "Of your courage to name it." Something inside me softened. For the first time, I saw the possibility that my broken moments weren't failures. They were ingredients. And maybe the only way to truly train your English is to walk straight into the uncomfortable parts and tell the story anyway. Because your voice isn't fragile, it's just waiting to meet the parts of you you've been avoiding. The photo that changed everything. There's a moment, quiet, strange, almost electric, when someone shows you a version of yourself you've never seen before. That moment happened the day Emil finally handed me the photograph he took on the bridge. He didn't send it digitally. Of course not. He printed it on matte paper, like it belonged in a gallery full of people pretending to understand modern art. When he placed it in my hands, I felt my stomach flip the way it does right before you check an exam result you're certain you failed. The photo didn't look dramatic or cinematic. There were no tears, no wind blowing my hair like a shampoo commercial. It was just me, standing on the bridge, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes tired but focused. And there, right in the middle of my expression, was something I never expected to see: bravery. Not the loud, heroic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you're terrified but you keep going anyway. You see it? Emil asked. I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to understand how the person in that photo could possibly be me. Because here's the truth, when you struggle with English or any skill, you slowly start believing your failures define you. The missed words, the awkward pauses, the confusion, the moments you freeze and your brain becomes a soggy biscuit. Your self-image becomes blurry, distorted by insecurity. Psychologists call this identity shrinkage, when your confidence collapses into the small space of your mistakes, and you forget the rest of who you are. But that photo cracked the distortion. For the first time I saw someone trying, not failing. Someone fighting, not folding. Someone who wasn't broken, just in transition. And transitions always look messy from the inside. Emil must have sensed the internal earthquake because he said, "Most people look at their pain and see weakness. I look at your pain and see the doorway where your courage walks in." Sometimes artists say things so poetic you want to throw a baguette at them, but this time it hit exactly where it needed to. Then he asked me something strange. What would happen if you trained your English the way you look in this picture? Honest. Unfiltered. Without pretending you've already mastered everything. I didn't realize it at the time, but this single question rewired my entire approach. Instead of chasing perfection, I started chasing presence. Instead of hiding my mistakes, I started observing them. Instead of feeling embarrassed every time I misunderstood someone, I used those moments as tiny data points for improvement. That night, I practiced speaking out loud in my apartment, not with the energy of a student preparing for judgment, but with the softness of someone learning how to be human again. I said things slowly, clearly, imperfectly. And for the first time my English felt like mine, not something borrowed, not something forced. Just mine. It's strange how one photograph, one frozen moment, can break a story you've been telling yourself for years. The story that you're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable. That picture didn't show someone failing. It showed someone in the middle of becoming. Because maybe the parts of you you're most ashamed of aren't the parts that ruin you. Maybe they're the parts that rebuild you. Becoming the photographer. After months of snowy streets, awkward conversations, and countless micro-speaking exercises, I began to notice a shift. My English wasn't perfect, far from it, but my fear of speaking had softened. I realized something profound. My struggle, my embarrassment, my repeated failures, they weren't obstacles. They were teachers. And slowly I started to see the beauty in the cracks. Just like Emil had shown me, I began carrying a small notebook everywhere, jotting down the little things that made Danish life feel alive. The way light hits a red brick wall, the sound of distant church bells, or even the way someone pauses mid-sentence when searching for the right word. Each note became a story I would later retell in English. Not rehearsed, not polished, just honest. And with each retelling my voice grew steadier. My listening sharpened. My reading comprehension felt more intuitive. It was like I was building a bridge inside myself, connecting my emotions to my language skills. One day, Emil invited me to assist him on a shoot. This time, instead of observing someone else's broken heart, I was helping capture their story. And as I watched people reveal themselves, awkward, shy, vulnerable, I understood something. My own broken, hesitant English had been a key to empathy. The very struggles I had tried to hide now allowed me to guide others through theirs. I was, in a way, becoming a photographer of broken hearts myself, capturing not images but courage in motion. I also began experimenting with new habits for my English practice. I used three-layer retelling. I would first narrate an event silently in my mind, then speak it out loud in simple sentences, and finally expand it naturally with details and emotions. Felt slow, deliberate, and yes, sometimes ridiculous, but it worked. Slowly, my brain stopped panicking. Slowly, I started trusting my voice. Slowly, I learned that learning English wasn't a race. It was a journey of noticing, feeling, and speaking. Looking back, I realized the cafes, the bridges, the snowy walks, and even the breakdowns weren't just random moments. They were lessons in resilience, patience, and observation. And the photograph Emile gave me? It became my symbol, reminding me that imperfection is the doorway to progress. So here I am now, standing somewhere between who I was and who I'm becoming. My English is still a work in progress, but I no longer fear the pauses, the mistakes, or the silences. I've learned to embrace them. And more than that, I've learned to see the beauty in my own pain and to use it as a lens to grow, to speak, and to connect with others. Because sometimes the best way to master a language and perhaps life itself is to become the photographer of your own heart, capturing the courage hidden inside every imperfect moment.